Can you hear me now? I don't know.
Yeah, I can hear you. No, I can hear
Okay.
you. Yeah, you're fine.
But yeah, basically that's where we go into, and when you start like this is the thing right now with a lot of these players. I just question, okay, they just got through playing college football like some teams just a couple weeks ago, and they already had to either make a decision whether or not to come into the draft. Then, of course, if you're gonna get ready for the draft, you gotta, be prepared for the draft. And it's a slew of these. The calendar is getting more condensed by the year. It seems like because there's more All-Star games. Then you got the transfer portal coinciding with prospective prospects, and that's where a lot of them go to the NFL. And if they not, because they don't want to leave college football unless they know that they're going to get drafted at a third or higher. Usually, is the the rules right now as far as like what they usually look for. Usually, if they're a fourth round perspective as a junior, maybe they want to come back the next following season or something like that. But that's the one thing that because I think who is it, Messador, that they were talking about his age at 25. Well, if he doesn't come in and it takes him time to develop, I'm not saying he does or doesn't, but you see his window is already starting. Okay, and if it takes him 2 years to develop, if they deem him raw, well, then he'll be 27, 28. But then you got to look at the defensive tackle position, where that's a position where you can have a longer career if you're really good. Because you can look at the Calais Campbell. He has the defense. You can flip him inside, you can run him outside, you can do a multitude of things. And he's carved out a niche over his almost 20-year career, just as far as being a good leader, a solid all around player, and as far as one of the best run stoppers in the game, he's up there.
True, true. Calais is also what 6'8" with the wingspan of a two-car garage. So,
Yeah, he
so,
yes.
so Calais has been able to do a very good job of keeping guys off his chest for a long time as well. But do you think it's similar to what's going on? Well, at least what the approach used to be to the NBA draft back in the day, which was it was okay to draft seniors. Then became a point in time where everybody wanted the freshmen, everybody was chasing that ceiling. So everybody was drafting the one and done guys, and a lot of the one and done guys went to the NFL and became one and done. I mean, NBA and went one and done in the NBA. And then you're stuck with, not to say stuck with, but you have what they really don't seem to want, which is the high floor guys that are running the team. Look at Indiana, and not to trash anything about Indiana's championship, but if we look at the way they did it, they can honestly write a movie about the way Indiana did it. They did it with all grown players who went from experience beats talent any day of the week. I will always say that. That's why a lot of those one and done teams, a lot of those Kentucky teams back in the day, they did win the national championship because they ultimately lost out to teams that were more experienced, more developed physically as well as mentally. Is this a point in time where we could be getting back to drafting seniors like that? Because a guy like Messador, he's almost guaranteed to come in and be able to help you effectively immediately. Um, you take a risk on a guy like we were talking about Shamar Stewart before the video started. You take a risk on a guy like Shamar Stewart, drafting him where the Bengals drafted him, and you look back on it now, even the Miami Dolphins took Kenneth Grant at 15 last year. I get what they were doing with Kenneth Grant because that was a defense that severely needed physicality. They needed a bully. They needed a big physical guy in the middle of that defense, but you can honestly say they overdrafted, you know. And then you got a guy like Lee Horton in this class who's probably every bit the player of Kenneth Grant, if not better than Kenneth Grant. And you make the question of, well, if Grant can go 15, then a guy like Horton should be able to go 10 if that's the case. So I do think that the overall views and takes on the defensive line is changing now. You can get guys who are 23 years old now to come in and play on the defensive line. And as you said, to your credit, if you're a quality defensive tackle that can consistently stop the run, protect the line of scrimmage, two gap, give the occasional season where you might get 7.5 sacks, maybe 8, you can play for a long time. And it's those guys that anchor really well.
Well, and the one thing that I don't know if you remember the name Leroy Glover. He
Absolutely.
played for the New Orleans Saints. I believe he was with the Cowboys and the Seahawks, maybe towards the end of his career. But he always fascinated me because at the time in the early to mid 2000s, right there in that window, he was just putting up like 16, 17 sacks from a defensive tackle position. And he was not, it was a overly big guy. However, he was just real, just he started out, it just takes some seasoning. I think a lot of times, like you said, with, having a mixture, I think the problem sometimes is when you go just there's times in a franchise's evolution where okay you need to rebuild, you need to just strip it all the way down to the bare knuckles basically, and then just build back up. It's better that way because all you keep trying to do is chase after the generational talent. Everybody wants the next Michael Parsons. Chances are the Cowboys are not going to get somebody as far as the impact that Michael Parsons had on their defense while he was with Dallas. They're going to be hard pressed to find that from a rookie. So, in doing so, what you got to look at is like, okay, well, how can I maximize this pick? Whether it's at 12 or 20, they have two of them. And then from there, that's where and I'm more of I like options. I want options. If I'm sitting there at 12, I ain't got no problem sliding back to 15 if you want to throw me a 3 or a second or something like that. If there's a guy you really want to get, that's the way that you should look at the draft instead of just going, say, like you mentioned before, with Mendoza being, potentially the number one pick. As far as quarterback right now, yeah, he is my number one quarterback. He is, there was nobody. Now, as far as if I had a quarterback, that would be a better option. And that's why I look at like some of these veteran quarterbacks. Who's going to be the next Sam Darnold? Who's going to be that next one that all they looking for are the Baker Mayfield? Because those guys are going to have a heads up over an inexperienced quarterback.
No, I agree 100%. And that was a great segue, actually. So, Fernando Mendoza. Now, regardless of how you view him, not you personally, but the public overall perception, I try to not stay a slave to what I thought of a guy back during the summer. You and I talked about this before we started the video in regards to like what your approach is prior draft, during, spring ball, summer. Me personally, I'm entrenched in like all right, prime example. So the 2027 draft, by the time the end of May rolls around, I'm gonna be entrenched into that. To the point that by the time the college football season begins, I'm fed up with football. Like I'm fed up with college football by then because I've been watching college film all summer. Watching college football games during the college football season is kind of hit or miss for me. Married, kids, um, my wife lets me have my Sundays to myself, so therefore I got to sacrifice one of those other days. So Saturdays are typically hers, and the family for that matter. But when I do get the opportunity to sit down and watch college football live, I always jump on it. But I say all that to say this: we get back to when you look at these players. I looked at Mendoza 2 weeks after last year's NFL draft, and it was all Cal film. And what I saw was okay. This is a guy that can power the deep out. Um, He can fire the ball downfield when you need him to. He can overthrow some scissors. Like there's some things that he can do out there. There was the raw talent, and then you had to factor in the fact that this guy played with pretty much no NFL talent at Cal. So I already knew, I had in my mind that okay, he's transferring to Indiana. Great situation there. I expect Mendoza to play really better. I never envisioned him being the number one overall pick, though. I felt at best, even early on to midway of the season, I thought he was someone who could be drafted midway through the first round. I had some deeper thoughts on Dante Moore of Oregon, but Mendoza was never the quarterback I envisioned that he turned out to be this season. He had a magical Joe Burrow type of, ride. What are your overall thoughts on Mendoza? Because we being honest about this. Me personally, I'm gonna let you get into it first, and then I'll follow you.
Well, I guess I must first say that my background is sports marketing. So when you think from a marketing aspect in the NFL draft, you got to look at it from a perspective as well as positioning, financial, because each draft selection equals a dollar. So at that point, the difference between the number one pick and the number one two pick now, unlike it was years past, where it was, uh, a lot more money, like the Jamarcus Russells and there was more risk because it was a bigger, they put them on the rookie scale. So once the rookie scale, so that makes everything more of a marketing machine. And then you take that you got the NIL. So you have to really, from a scout's perspective, when you sit down and just look at it from a specific evaluation point for the next level, just make sure that you stick to what you do. And that's what I've been told by numerous NFL scouts over and over again. Stick with what you know, stay in your lane. Don't try to recreate the process. Follow the process, respect the process, and it'll lead you in the right direction. However, the marketing aspect comes into it as like the Raiders. And the only reason I say this is because they're looking at it now, they have the number one pick. It's an obvious need from they don't have a quarterback right now. And that would bring it right to Mendoza. However, that also makes that pick very valuable in the aspect that if they were to move off of it, what other resources could they get? I would, that's something that, the draft process will play itself out when you go, because right now we're still at the all-star games. Then, will he throw at the combine? Will he not throw at the combine? How does that impact the decision? Things of that nature, and kind of to also talk about yeah, and I understand that I'm blessed where, unfortunately certain things happen in my life where, I have the ability to kind of be able to, because that's my job is working in sports marketing. So Saturdays working in marketing, I get to work and do it at the same time. So that's why being able to do both whenever I see the Senior Bowl and I see the Panini or whatever it's called, I automatically know it's marketing. So, and where the marketing is, you notice the NFL is there, the brand sponsorships and marketing, and it all ties hand in hand together.
So what you're telling me is you think the Raiders are trying to rebrand themselves, remarket themselves? Because Mendoza,
Yes.
from head to toe, from how he handles the media, his background, everything about Mendoza is the complete contrast to Jamarcus Russell. I don't think I don't really believe they're factoring any of that into it. A lot of it is just, saying circumstance, things unfold the way they unfold on a year-to-year basis. That's why you can't plan for a quarterback, because the top guy, it's almost guaranteed whoever the top guy is for 2027 won't be the top guy when 2027 gets here. So if you look at the Mendoza situation, head coach is still up in the air. And I'm not as down on the Raiders or Mendoza, because I think that for the same things you just said right here, I think that they may be a perfect marriage for each other. at the right point in times, crossing the roads like two trains in the night. Because granted, the Raiders had one of the worst offensive lines in football a year ago, but that's something that can be fixed. And the good thing about fixing the offensive line is something that can be fixed later on in the draft. You can find high level guard play in the third, fourth, fifth round, sixth round. This is a team, I believe, that has 10 draft picks. But, Mendoza's walking into a situation where he has two high level tight ends in Michael Mayer as well as Brock Bowers. Regardless of how people may view Ashton Jeanty, he is a good running back at the least. How great is he? Is he Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs or Jonathan Taylor? Only time will tell, but we know he's at least a good back, for that matter. And if you give him a pretty good offensive line, he may be a 14, 15, 1600 yard back. You never know. I think ultimately a running back's full success is going to be predicated off what his offensive line is. Now you got once in a lifetime backs like a Barry Sanders, or even I consider Adrian Peterson to be that. He was one of the few players I felt that when he played as a freshman, you knew Adrian Peterson could have left early after his freshman year at Oklahoma. When you saw Calvin Johnson play as a true freshman at Georgia Tech, you knew the NFL was in trouble in another 3 years. You got certain players that are like that. Whether Mendoza is that or not, I don't think it really matters, because if you're the Raiders, you've already went down the road before of expecting the quarterback to save your situation. How about you draft a pretty good quarterback and you save his situation? He complements your situation. That's pretty much how I view it. He's 6'5", 225, big, strong arm. Is he perfect? No. Does he look a little awkward in the pocket? His throwing motion's a little funky. Are there I think a lot of the things with him, the issues people have with him is kind of cosmetic. But if you're talking about a guy who's tough, he can run. He showed you in the national championship game, for him to be able to dive and make that play without losing the football, he may be the perfect fit for the Raiders. Now, is he Andrew Luck? Is he Joe Burrow? Is he one of those guys that are deemed as a generational talent? Maybe not. But he didn't come from out of nowhere. So for people who think he came from out of nowhere, he didn't come from out of nowhere.
No.
Yeah, he was on the NFL radar at Cal. They were just giving him that chance to go to Indiana and show that he can actually do it on a bigger stage.
And normally, like the way I look at Cal, like they've always had, going all the way back to the '80s, they've always had good quarterback play. You got we even got with the Lions with Golf. That he was a great quarterback at Cal. I mean, it's not like they don't have the ability. And then once he's had a good coach Signetti, having the ability to have that system, be able to have that kind of, and he has natural leadership ability and charisma and things that those players around him, his teammates, his offensive line, he just seems like he would be just a good fit for the Oakland or the Las Vegas Raiders going forward. Uh, as far as like you was talking about Ashton Jeanty, I think like you said, there's pieces, some pieces, not a lot, but there's some pieces in place there because they have Powers Johnson from Oregon. He missed a lot of the season this past season with an injury. So, and prior to this season, I know everybody was high. He was one of the higher picks the last few years on their offensive line that panned out so far. Then you have
Colt Miller
Mayer.
was another.
Yep. And see, yep. And so they have some pieces. I think they're ready now more so on the offense. If Mendoza comes in and can pick up everything, and that's the one thing that it's still early in the process, and you don't know, what because last year everybody at this point or this stage, everybody was talking about Shador being the number one pick possibly, and then we saw what ended up developing there. So I just go through the process. I enjoy the process. It does get stressful and nerve wracking. That's why I had to tell you, like I'm getting older. I'm a little slower, But trust me, I'm coming though. So
All right. Direct question. Who's quarterback number 2? And I think this is going to transfer straight over to a guy that you're pretty familiar with down there at LSU, and that's Garrett Nussmeier, a guy who began this offseason. PFF had him, not only PFF, but a lot of national publications, mock draft publications, had him rated as either number 1 or number 2 in this class. Another guy, Lenora Sellers, who chose to not come out and chose to go back to school. He was another one that was ranked between 1 and 3, 1 and 4, all based upon whatever publication you chose to follow. But what went on with Nussmeier this season? Because the guy that we saw last year, and granted, he lost a lot. This is the first time, I believe, in years that LSU didn't have a big time wide receiver prospect. You know, a Malik Neighbors, a Jamar Chase, a Justin Jefferson, a Brian Thomas. The offensive line wasn't as good neither this year. Was it just all the ancillary pieces around him that fell off, or was it something more with Garrett Nussmeier?
well, I really think that it was he was a part of it. However, he wasn't the reason the wheels came tumbling off or falling off or whatever you want to categorize it as. As far as he probably does need to get back into a good system to be able to kind of have a red shirt year going his first year in the league, in my opinion. Because going forward, because whether it's through the lack of pass protection that they were going through, or like you mentioned, not always having the wide receiver playmakers like a Burrow did while he was there, that would most definitely, all Brian Thomas. I know we talk about Jaden Daniels as well. That's the one thing I think that has more to do with the program at that time as a whole, and I just think he was just happened to be in that situation. Lenora Sellers, I think it was wise for him to go back. Why commit yourself to, at least, to give yourself another year. He's still a fairly young quarterback. Nussmeier, him going ahead and getting into a pro system, I think it's the next step in his development process, is what I personally believe it to be as. For this draft, going forward, I'm a little like skeptical as far as like really who is the number 2 behind Mendoza. That's a great question that I would definitely look forward to finding out the answer to sooner, faster, than quicker.
True,
So,
true. Because Nussmeier only played in 9 games this season,
mm-hmm.
13 in 2024, and of course he played in 6 in 2023. Uh, the numbers were dramatically down. If you look at the 12 touchdowns to the 5 interceptions, also over those 9 games, that is not nothing really to write home about. He still managed to complete 67% of his passes, but a big issue I've had with him, not even necessarily an issue, I don't want to go to that point to say it like that, but it's hard for me to really feel good or feel comfortable about drafting a quarterback in the first round without traits. People say, well, Joe Burrow didn't have traits, but Burrow had traits. Burrow had a better arm, I believe, an overall athletic arm. And what I mean by athletic arm, a guy who, it doesn't mean I can necessarily drive the ball 85 yards downfield, but a guy who can maintain his base, change platforms, and still muscle the ball 45 to 50. I don't need you to throw the ball 85 yards. I don't need a Josh Allen, not a, or it would be nice to have a Josh Allen arm. Don't get me wrong. It's not necessarily a requirement, but an arm that's good enough to be able to attack every blade of grass, maybe not with power, but with ball placement. And I think that's what was part of what made Joe Burrow so elite. Now, there were questions about Burrow coming out. Well, is he a product of Joe Brady's system? And well, look at all those guys he had to throw to. It was a perfect storm. Well, Mendoza's kind of hearing those same, questions right now, for that matter. But Nussmeier also doesn't really pass the physical eye test. What is he? He measured in at like 6'1.5", 202 pounds. Who was the last quarterback around that size that really had staying power as a starting quarterback in the NFL? You know, nobody's trying to clown Nussmeier or anything like that, but he got a lot of questions to answer. And I think for him, he had a great week of practice. You know, from everything I've heard, I don't know about you personally, but from everything I've heard, he was the leader of everything as far as the quarterbacks. He was the first guy there clapping up everybody, whether it was the offensive lineman, the defensive lineman, the wide receivers, the D backs. I think he's also a guy. This is a guy who was, well, not was, but he's the son of a coach. So he behaves the way you expect the son of a coach to behave. You know, so listen, there were people when Kellen Moore came out of Boise State, there were people talking about at the draft, as well as Kevin O'Connell. There were
No, no,
people
no, no,
talking
no,
about
no.
not the.
The reason, no, the reason
I'm
I kind of laugh, like the reason I laugh, I'm sorry, I wouldn't know good job. But Kellen Moore, that's exactly who he reminds, like Tony Romo, Kellen Moore, that's when I see
yeah.
Nussmeier, like the whole time he was in college, every time I was like, yeah, Tony Romo, that and of course, you know my background and Tony Romo, and I can see it night clear as day. I was like, yeah, he played just like Tony, and he would do
Yeah.
some of the same stuff.
Yeah.
So, but
I
go
don't think
ahead.
he's
No,
I
go.
don't think he's the yeah, I don't think he's the gamer or like gunslinger Romo is. You know, Romo has some talent. You know, Romo has some arm talent over there too as well. But yeah, I when people look at you at the NFL draft or prior to the draft or during the draft, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, that guy's going to be a great coach one day." That lets that lets me know everything that I kind of need to hear. That's what was said about Kellen Moore. Even though I never truly believed Kellen Moore was going to be ever be a starter in the NFL anyway, but the arm deficiencies were just too dramatic, I think, for him.
Mhm.
You know, at the end of the
Oh,
day.
yeah.
Now, Kevin
At a
O'Connell,
certain,
I thought had an opportunity to play, but for whatever reason, Kevin O'Connell never played either in the league. But he turned out to be a hell of a coach.
then you got to also look like who was. Didn't he start out behind Brady or he was
Yep.
somewhere in the Patriot chain? So I knew it. Like, I mean, you got to look at it. Like, I mean, if you never get the opportunity, Brady. If the Drew Bledsoe situation went different, who knows? We would never might have never saw Tom Brady. Turn out well, we would have saw him back in college, but as far as like up there in Michigan or whatnot, but you know, you just once you get that opportunity, you just never know.
Absolutely, absolutely. So real quick, I want to get into some prospects because at the end of the day, we are still Dallas Cowboys, Detroit Lions. So our viewpoints are going to be skewed towards our teams a little bit. Everything I think about in regards to the draft, well, at least 70% of it factors into my Detroit Lions. Whether or not I'm wearing the Arizona Cardinals hat or not doesn't matter because it's the off season. I wear whatever the hell I want to wear. But let's talk defensive end because I think defensive end slash edge rusher is a position that both of these franchises, both of these fan bases, both of these media bases have talked about as being needs for both teams for various reasons. You guys traded away your best pass rusher to get better at the run and also collect picks, but it kind of left a hole in regards to getting after the quarterback. My team has been trying to find a consistent pass rush threat opposite of Aiden Hutchinson for the past 3 years. We passed on a few guys in last year's draft. Um, you guys was it Donovan Ezerique? Yeah, yep. So you guys did select him. Thought he played pretty well. But I want to get into one of the more polarizing defensive ends real quick. How much do you know about Keldrick Falk, defensive end from Auburn?
If the Cowboys select him at number 12, I'll be ecstatic. He's
What?
long, big. His ability, like, I mean, as far as a run stopper right now, you coincide that with Quentin Williams, it gives you so many options. Or you could wait till 20, but he's one of the guys that I would have in my little my little holster if I was Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones. Somewhere
Um,
in there, he
yeah.
would be a target.
So whether it's 12 or 20, because I think 12 for me is, and I like Keldrick Falk, the player. I'm with you 100%. I think right now, as a run defender, he's elite. But when you look at Keldrick, and he had the one big year of pass rush production, which was 2024. He had 20 sacks. I mean, 20 sacks. He had 2 sacks in 13 games in 2023. He had 9 sacks in 12 games in 2024. And he had just 2 sacks in 12 games this season in 2025. And if you look at his overall alignments, he's been lined up. This season he had 333 snaps at the 5 tech, right outside the offensive tackle. So, are you comfortable? This is pretty much the question. Are you really comfortable taking a defensive end at number 12 that may never be a consistent double-digit pass rusher?
That's the question that I really need for Ezra Rocco. Okay, Ezra Rocco, just to go off of, like, because if you're going to ask me going forward as a rookie, tremendous. The only issue that I had against him was sometimes he was such a great pass rusher that he would give up the edge, which would allow the run. You could run at it, and when Sam Williams would come in on the opposite side, he would collapse down, and then nobody was able to get around the defense to be able to, until we started getting the trade with Kenny Clark and Quentin Williams coming on in. Now Osa is the one that I was really. He has a lot of ability where you could use him in a defensive end. I think personally that gives you another body. Plus, that allows you to have Quentin Williams, because you got to remember that's going to be the centerpiece right there. So you give him a teammate like Keldrick Falk. I don't care if it's at 12 or 20. I would prefer more options at 12. I'm looking at Caleb Downs, but hey, you know,
Oh
that's
yeah.
a different discussion for a different day, position, need, whatnot. Because the bottom line is Dallas needs two things out of this draft. They need somebody who can set up and call the plays on defense, and a playmaker. And the playmaker could already be Ezra Raku, but he just needs to be the pass rush specialist. And by getting him with Osa, by having him
There we
already
go.
on the field, there you go. Yeah, yeah. But I was trying to start losing people, but but that's basically how I would start piecing it together. Because you want right now, Dallas has so many holes on defense outside of probably 4 or 5 players.
Yeah.
I would be uncomfortable for everybody on that defense personally right now going forward.
Yeah. I would say from the Detroit Lions perspective, he's who Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell like. For people around here who couldn't understand why they wanted Marcus Davenport to work out so much, because Davenport was 6'6", 270. Um, he was a old school. He could either play the 3-4 defensive end, he could play the 4-3 traditional defensive end with his hand in the dirt. He could protect all those outside gaps, the C gap. He can run contain. He was an elite run defender, and he was a solid power rusher. You can make the argument if Marcus Davenport would have been healthy throughout his career, he could have been a consistent 11, 12, 13 sack guy. Like, Davenport is a really talented player. Problem is he can't stay healthy. Now, if you look at and I was about to compare him to this guy too. If you look at Keldrick Falk, and I talked to someone else about this, he's 6'6", 285. It's a slim built 285 though. It's like a basketball player type of 285. And there go Diego Pavi in the in the picture too, though. Back turn. But personally, I look at Keldrick Falk and I see maybe could he, because 285, he been 285 since high school to at least 280. So it's not far-fetched that he won't outgrow the position and you could kick him inside. He gets around 6'6", 300, 308, because he's still a kid. Could he be a DeForest Buckner type? Because I think he's that good against the run. And even though he has that slimmer, high cut basketball type of body, he holds ground really well. He two gaps really well. Now, why he didn't get the pass rush stats this season that he got last season, I can't explain it. I've been through what 3 games of Keldrick Fawkes so far, other than just watching his games and watching a couple of games of 2024. But part of being an evaluator for your organization, as you understand this as well, you have to think like your organization. You don't have to like it, but you have to be able to think like your organization to say, yeah, that's something Jerry would do. Oh yeah, that's something that's a guy our defensive line coach would like. I don't like him, but that's a guy he would like. And when I look at Keldrick Falk, I see a guy that I guarantee you Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell like. They like Shamar Stewart last year for the same exact reasons. Shamar Stewart was 6'5.5", 265, long arms. Yeah, looked like a Greek god in his clothes and all. Like they like those type of defensive ends, those big old school rugged type of defensive ends. But I'm glad they didn't take Shamar Stewart. I'm glad it didn't happen. We took Tyleik Williams. Tyleik didn't play a huge role for us this season, but we expect big things from him. So you're okay with Keldrick Falk, at least for what Dallas has built right now.
Okay. My player comp right now, as of today, without just basing off everything that I've studied to this point, Jaelan Phillips, that talent level. Where Jaelan Phillips, he's with the Philadelphia Eagles now. He was with the Miami Dolphins. Same similar build, same makeup. The only difference is as far as I had to just double check his medical history as far as like certain things in there, just making sure. But the only reason why Miami was looking to get it from underneath him was because he's had a few major injuries, but as you saw, the Philadelphia Eagles were willing to take a chance on him, and he played huge dividends for their defense towards the back end of their season. So, but that's who I would give my player comp as of today, not knowing all the other stuff as far as medicals and things of that nature.
Of course not.
And Jaelan Phillips, just to give you a background, he was at the time when he came out of high school, he was like one of the number 1 ranked defensive ends in the entire nation. So,
yeah. Hey, speaking of that, I want to get into a player, man, and this is a guy who we talked about this school before the video started. Clemson, Peter Woods, defensive tackle from Clemson, phenomenal freshman season, right along with TJ Parker. Both of those guys together, phenomenal as freshmen. Neither guy has scraped anywhere near what they were as freshmen. You can blame it on them. You can blame it on the system, the scheme. I'm a guy I've said it, at least I seem to say it every single draft cycle. I don't know how to fairly evaluate Clemson defensive linemen because of the system that they play in. Peter Woods all summer, and I would say probably at least 6 or 7, maybe 8 weeks into the college football regular season, he was a projected top 7 to 10 pick and the unanimous number 1 defensive tackle on the board. What are your thoughts on Peter Woods and ultimately what happened with him?
I think a lot of times the Clemson, it's the players that these are highly talented players, highly talented. I mean, coming out of high school, and like you mentioned, you talk about he's young, a fairly young player, in his development stage, and that's what I look at everything at. Where are they at? When did they start playing football? Some defensive tackles may have started when they was in middle school, junior, it just, to me, you have to go all the way that back just to find, if you're going to invest a first round pick in a player, you have to be willing to go that far back to do that research. And I know these, NFL teams, they do that type of research. They put where, and I guess my biggest thing is when you look at like certain programs right now, because Clemson at times have been, okay, national championship program. They're going through difficult times right now compared to where they were. So I don't know how that goes back to what I was talking about with Nussmeier earlier with LSU. That's actually having it does play into a huge role there. Like, well, is it the apple to orange kind of thing, or is the players or is it the coaches? Like, and it has to be somewhere, and that's where I try, especially, that's why I focus on successful programs, because that way, at least you understand that you don't have to do as much research in that area. But that's the one thing that, and I think you mentioned this. This is information you gave me, and you don't probably even remember telling me this, but this was back in August. Mozzie Smith was on the Cowboys team at that time, and and until I talked to you, I had gotten gun shy with Michigan players. But I say that, but Will Johnson, who got drafted by the Cardinals last year, this past draft, phenomenal player. I was like, man, and Jordan Lewis, he's a Michigan guy. So I was like, well, you can't necessarily, you just got to go back and do the research on,
Yeah.
the players, their coach. It may have just, you know, you just never know what the actual thing. So that's why before I just automatically just dive into it, I got to do some research first. And that's what I know these teams do across the board. But just to answer your question, compared to Detroit, I mean, when I look at Detroit right now, I feel like you guys are closer. If I was like, when I say to winning the championship, I'm talking about like I would be willing to go all in, whatever that equates to. And you know, I mean, everybody has all in. Well, I'm willing to go maybe this high, not this high. Well, when I say all in, I'm talking about
Yeah.
you're going to do what the
I
Green
don't
Bay
care what it
Packers,
costs.
yeah, yeah, the Green Bay Packers, whether they made it or
Yeah.
not, you got to give them respect, because at the end of the day, they gave them 47 million a year, and they gave up the picks and a player for. So that's a lot, but they got their guy.
Yeah.
So and I'm happy for Michael, because Michael is a really good guy. He a really good dude and great player, phenomenal. He is a generational talent. So the people that, and that's one thing I he could be with whatever team. I would still say that about Michael. So.
I'm gonna say a few things about Peter Woods. I've been watching a lot of Peter Woods the past couple years, man. Like I said, ever since he was a true freshman at Clemson, a lot of the questions I've heard about him apply to Jalen Carter. They apply to the defensive tackle the Buffalo Bills took out of Kentucky. What's the guy from this past draft, the 6'7" guy out of Kentucky, the
And
defensive tackle. Um, Same thing, the same questions people had about Walter Nolan. Also, out of
It's Walker, wasn't
yeah,
it?
yep, yep. Sometimes with these super talented players, and you can take this theory and you can apply it and succeed, or you can take it and you can apply it and fail. It's not foolproof at all. Sometimes I think we overthink these defensive tackles and their level of impact in college. All of these guys aren't getting used the way we think they should be used. We're looking at it from an NFL perspective instead of sometimes a goofy college defensive coordinator perspective or a goofy college offensive coordinator perspective. When you look at Peter Woods, a lot of people say, okay, well, the production was there. He only had 3 sacks through 8 games this year. Are you getting are you not getting home because it's lack of effort? Are you not getting home or making plays we feel like you have the athletic ability to make because offensive guards are dominating you? You're getting reached all day long, you're getting reach blocked all day long. or is it just it's not your play to be made? I saw a lot of plays out of Peter Woods where it just wasn't his play to be made in a lot of those games. But when you gave him the opportunity to make his plays, he made them. Now, when they did use him as a pass rusher, because he's a natural 3 tech, I think that's him being anything else, I think is kind of out the water. But if you compare him to a guy who came out with Dexter Lawrence and Cleveland Farrell, Christian Wilkins. So let's just compare him to Christian Wilkins. Do you think he's a better prospect than Christian Wilkins was? Because they're pretty much the same height, weight, build.
And that's what I was gonna say, because when I was gonna say that, to me they're, and I would say probably right now I would have had Wilkins at the time maybe a little higher. Like, and I'm just looking because I'm having to look, because like last year the defensive tackle I liked the most was Walter Nolan. That was me. Like, that was a guy I like. Now I know
Yeah, me
everybody
too.
did talk about Walker, the Harmon guy that from Oregon, stuff like
Pittsburgh.
that.
Yep.
Yep. So, but I like Nolan, and that's what frustrated me with about Dallas. With the That's what frustrated me with Dallas was, okay. Well, we ended up, okay. It was kind of like it's like they should have made the trade earlier. Is if they were gonna get rid of Micah, that's what they should have done, because it threw everything out of the whack. Because now you're trying to trade him because you're trying to maximize his value, but then, okay, now you're gonna end up flipping the first to the Jets because now you need a defensive tackle, and instead of that's what it just started looking like. Where are y'all going with this whole thing? And I was like, I guess got to wait for the sun to settle, or the dust to settle, to see what's left. To just go from there. But if they would have just simply just picked Walt Tolan, but then that would have probably cost them Booker from Alabama, and he's a really really good guard. Like,
Absolutely.
you come straight in from college. I don't care on any level, and he's replacing a Hall of Fame right guard, Zach Martin, and it was like a snippet. And you don't ever see that hardly. You
True.
always you don't want to be the guy that follows the guy. You want to be the guy that follows the guy, kind of thing. So, but he stepped right on in there. So that part of it solidified the offense. But on the defense, we keep constantly spending all these high first round picks on offensive tackles. And that's why I said, don't be surprised if Dallas don't be looking in that direction again. The name to keep an eye on is still the right tackle. Because if they decide to move on from him, they'll be in they have, because they'll have to, you got to protect your $60 million quarterback.
Absolutely. Next guy, we did a film exam on this kid about a month ago. Anthony Hill Jr., linebacker from Texas. You and I were talking about him earlier. We both are kind of in agreement that for the most part, I don't think he's the guy who you plug in the middle of your defense and just depend on him to be the hard hat guy of the defense in the middle of the defense. I think he's a little undersized. Even if you look at the size, if I'm not mistaken, he's still around 238. But I'm a guy that's really into body types too. That's a very slim 238. I kind of view him as more of a complimentary off-ball linebacker, where if you put him next to a guy, and I brought the comparison in because he's plays for my team, you put him next to Jack Campbell, strong side, and then you pair that with Derek Barnes, and then whatever linebacker you choose to go after in free agency, because there's a good chance that a guy your team may go ahead and consider signing in free agency, Alex Anzalone, he'll be available, because I'm pretty sure that boat has sailed with Detroit after he didn't get the money he wanted last offseason. But didn't make the amount of plays this year that he was able to make in 2024. But in 2024, I don't want to say he had a bad year this year. It's just tough because I think when you go back to school, he ain't really had too much of a choice. But when you have such a really good year, a really great high level year as a player in college, whether you go back by decision or you go back because you're just not eligible. If you don't exceed that previous season, oh, that guy's not as good as we thought he was. Oh, what a buzz. He fell short of expectations. It's like, no, I just had a great season last year, and then for other reasons, I didn't have as great of a season. It doesn't make me a bad player. But you're talking about an off-ball linebacker that can do everything. I don't think he's as advanced as a pass rusher as some people do. I think when he gets home, when he's effective at it, is because of speed. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can never have too much speed off the edge, but short tackler, really good instincts. He can drop in zones and cover, force fumbles, interceptions. He's a guy that can make a ton of plays, I think, if you have good protection for him. So that's my perspective on him as far as the Detroit Lions. You had some thoughts on him in regards to how he could potentially affect the Dallas Cowboys.
Almost definitely, and that he's a player that Longhorns right there, Texas. They have that admiration for Texas players. There goes into the marketing side of it, and then also the one thing that people got to look at with Anthony Hill Jr. My player comp right now is Demarion Overshawn. That's who he reminds me a lot of. The only difference between he and Overshawn is he's just a little bit of, of course, Overshawn going into his third year, going forward. Extreme prior to the injuries was extreme athletic, long, can play, make plays in his few limited amount of snaps that at the next level. And he was a fourth round pick. However, I say that, but he was a player that I identified early in the process because of the fact for Dallas, I was expecting Green Bay to end up having a pick later towards the end of the first round. Not as at 20 where they ended up, which is a benefit for Cowboys. But for Anthony Hill, he's most definitely somebody under like from 26 to 32. He was somebody I have high on my radar because he gives you that, like you said, as far as all ball linebacker ability to go play sideline to sideline coverage. Uh, and he's definitely going to be a target for the Cowboys at some point, I believe, because uh, I think his name is Paxton Jones. He actually is the grandson of Jerry Jones. He's very familiar because he's an alumni of the University of Texas. So they have a rich history in that program. As you'll see come around that draft time, he'll be a name that you continuously see around the Cowboys in the mock.
So yeah, I agree. Anthony Hill Jr. also another guy who, if you go back to preseason publications right after spring ball throughout the summer, he was rated as a guy who was a top 10 pick. And of course, as the season unfolds, other names rise up, guys underperform a little or fall short of certain expectations some people had, and they fall in the draft. I've seen mocks with Anthony Hill Jr. in the second round. I've seen people who still have him as a top 32 pick. I think in regards to him is similar to a lot of other prospects in his class. And this has been my way of thinking in regards to team building for a while. It's not, I don't draft with the mindset of how can you come in and save my job? Or how can you come in and save my defense? I look at these players as, okay, you know what? He may not be able to do M, R, and P, but he can do A, B, and C. Okay. And if he does A, B, and C really well, how does that complement him with these guys that I have around him? And even going back to a guy like Peter Woods, if you're drafting Peter Woods with the idea that he's going to step in and be Jalen Carter and save your defense, probably not. But if you're a team like the Atlanta Falcons who don't have a first round pick, and there's been talks about Peter Woods falling out of the first round, you put him in the middle of Atlanta's defense with all those pass rushers, maybe he's a different defensive tackle. if you put Peter Woods on Detroit's defensive line next to Aleem McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson, Jack Campbell behind him, is he a different defensive player? Maybe, maybe not. All depends upon, his ultimate drive and goals. But I just think that some of these players, man, they become, and you know this better than anybody, they become busts not because they can't play football. They become busts because they go to the wrong team. Maybe it's the wrong head coach. Maybe it's the wrong system. Maybe it's a coaching staff that had their eyes on a different player, but they got stuck with you. So the attitude is, I don't really give a damn about you because I never wanted you and you never perform. And then ultimately, it always goes back to the player was a bust. But if you go somewhere where you want it and they have plans for you to succeed and they got people around you that can help you grow and nurture your growth, then maybe you'll have some higher success, That's just my overall thoughts on Anthony Hill Jr. I think, and I told you before we started the show, I felt that he could be a big time playmaker if you put him in the right defense. If he's a 3-4 weak side outside linebacker, if you put him in a 3-3-5 where he can cover and show some versatility, blitz some gaps, yeah, I think Anthony Hill Jr. can be a really good player. You put him in a bear front, or you put him in a 4-3 front where you put too much physical strain on his body, I think that's where you could see a situation where he's not as successful. But moving on, man, another hot name. This guy was initially supposed to be at the Senior Bowl, but his name's so hot, he said, "The hell with the Senior Bowl," man. And that's David Bailey, man. High sack production, bro. We've been talking about defensive ends and edge rushers with no sack production, but all the measurables. He has none of the measurables, and he don't wear gloves, and I love that. So he doesn't have the measurables, and he's a front seven player that don't wear gloves. That lets you know how tough he is. But the dude got pass rush production at Stanford. He's got it at Texas Tech. My question for you is this, and you can ask the same question about his running mate, Romello Height. How much of their production was based upon who they had in the middle of that defense and Lee Horton? And Lee Horton is a guy who made himself a lot of money this week also at the Senior Bowl. He looks like he may be moving himself into defensive tackle number one, I think, in his class. So I don't think it's just Texas Tech. I think that when you go back and you look at David Bailey and his Stanford tape, he was the same player. He was the same exact player overall that he was at Stanford. So what are your thoughts on David Bailey? He's another guy that's been talked about potentially for the Dallas Cowboys at 12.
Well, the thing with Texas, their defense, and of course, that's how when I started looking at Texas Tech, they made, to me, what really impressed me the most about their team was how good they were on defense. The additions that they made, where they just brought a collective group of talented young football players, gave them some direction, and it was like watching poetry in motion a lot of times, the way that they were able to play off one another. Now, in evaluating them as a whole, individually, there's definitely, you don't have that kind of production without, having some kind of success on the team aspect as well. So I guess what I try to explain to people before is identifying the needs for your team, because the one piece that gets missed oversight or is because of free agency. How many teams are gonna and when I talk about free agency, I'm talking about the bodies that they start signing, not necessarily the expensive players or the quote unquote top of the market. We're talking about the low, like the more minimal marginal, what type of talent base. That usually tells you where a team's looking, because teams know they've already identified their top needs. And you have two choices, of course, and there's you have street free agency, you have unrestricted free agency, you have the draft, and to me, as a whole, that's where you start building the defense. And I think that's the best way that I can say you really, as the draft process goes on, just separate the individual players, and that comes from just breaking down their individual game tape play. Outside of what just as as the collective unit, you got to get down to the individual from here. And I think that's what's because otherwise you just basing it off of okay, well what happens if you don't have an Ezra Raku, or if you have this, or if the guy doesn't. So it's a lot of hypotheticals we could talk all day long about until we start identifying the needs first. That's usually where I go with it. But it's not to say anybody is incorrect. It's just easier for me to solve problems if I focus on finding the solution first. But if I don't even know what the problem is, I'm just standing there with my hands up in there, like, what do I do? So that's the philosophy that I usually approach it with. But right now, to answer
True.
your question, I mean, I look, but you coming like you got to understand where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a scarred year on defense, so I'm pretty abused right now. So I haven't had time to even breathe because I know
Well,
like we was just bad. That's all I can say.
no, you were, and I was going to get to that because it gets to a point. It gets to a point where I think
I'm happy with any of them at this point, really, to be honest with you. But go
you
ahead.
just. I think it gets to a point where, regardless of who you got as your edge rushers, if there's an edge rusher in the class that you view as special, you still not gonna pass him up. The year that we drafted Calvin Johnson, we still had was it who was it? Was Charles Rogers was officially still on the roster. Roy Williams was on the roster. We had another wide receiver, but Calvin Johnson was viewed as too damn good to pass up, even though, and I love Calvin. And I've been having this debate with a lot of Lions fans for a while, man. You can make the argument that if we would have took Adrian Peterson instead of Calvin Johnson, we would have won more games. I think is a very good chance that, and then you add Stafford to that equation. Stafford probably would have won more with Adrian Peterson instead of Calvin. But hey, I don't want to start no arguments with no Lions fans right now because I love Calvin. I was the main person saying at the draft, hey, listen, y'all hating on this guy right here. This guy's about to be the LeBron James of wide receivers. Like I was a huge Calvin Johnson fan, but I just think, but I make that comment to make this comment. If you look at David Bailey, going back to Stanford, 5 sacks in 2023, 7 sacks in 2024. He had 15 in 2025. You can attribute some of that to him being around more talent, better talent at Stanford, and some of that $20 million Texas Tech invested in that defense. But you look at the fact that, okay, 2025, he had an overall grade of 93.3. He played in 14 games, 623 snaps, man. 380 pass rush snaps. He had 15 sacks, 23 QB hits, 43 hurries, and 2 batted passes. If you can add, if even me for that matter, if I can add that type of production, now that's no guarantee he's going to be that at the next level, but this goes back to adding him to what you already have in Dallas. He already has Quentin Williams in front of him. He already has, even though you said you believe you guys are going to ultimately cut this guy and Kenny Clark, but for the time being, he does have Kenny Clark in front of him. He may have other defensive linemen in front of him, other linebacker help. If you have a decent amount of protection around him, Texas Tech just proved that. If you have David Bailey surrounded, because I understand he's not an elite run defender. He does the best he can. It's not from lack of effort. If you look at him on film, he's always the first person or the second person to the pile, whether it's on his side of the field or not. If you have top level talent surrounding him, I think he can give you the same type of pass rush production in the NFL. Like he can be a 13, 14, 15 sack guy. Now, he has to ultimately prove that. But if we're making all of this based upon traits, because he has the pass rush traits, we're talking about pass rush production. Same thing with a guy like Cassius Howell at Texas A&M. People say, well, He's just a speed rusher. He's just a one-trick pony. That's one hell of a one-trick pony. You talking about 3 straight years of double-digit sacks in college? Those are the type of guys who typically translate to the next level. If you show me 3 years of college production as an edge rusher, you show me 11 sacks in 2023, you show me 14 sacks in 2024, and you show me 11 sacks in 2025, you know what that tells me? Well, that guy has a natural instinct to get after quarterback. That's
consistent.
That's what it exactly. That's what it tells me. And I start thinking, well, hell, I don't just think, well, I'm just gonna throw that guy out there outside the tackle and just let him go. No, I started thinking, well, if I put him in this defense with Quinnen and Kenny Clark and Overshown and a few other people, maybe even Anthony Hill Jr. in the second round. You never know. How good can David Bailey be if I got him surrounded by that much protection? And now if the Jets take him at 2, I don't know. I don't know, man.
But and I know one thing, that would be a great job to have, be the general manager. Imagine being like, the old Will and Dillon kind of, like, if you had all them first round picks and second round picks. I was like, I mean, if nothing else, it's gonna be fun to accumulate talent. Whether it works out in the long run, we're gonna see. But they could do all kinds of things with their picks. Because their options are wide open. Because other than outside of Garrett Wilson, and a few other guys, they pretty much down to the They got to start using those picks now.
Yeah, I think they're in a situation, the Jets at number 2, where if you're being realistic, if you're not going to move up one spot for Mendoza, just go ahead and punt on this year. I mean, I would say, of course, you draft a quarterback, whether it be in the 3rd round, 4. You got to get another young arm in the room at least. But this is where the head coach and the GM and the team president and the ownership have to be on the same page. If I'm Aaron Glenn, I have to talk to these people and let them understand, listen, the guy isn't there at 2. We're not going to force this. We're going to take the best available player at number 2, whether you think it's Caleb Downs. I'm not in favor of taking the safety number 2 overall, though.
Oh, no.
Unless he's got crazy ball production or something. But no, not at number 2. But if you're Aaron Glenn, it has to be an agreement that we understand, okay, we may go into 2026 season with a veteran, whoever it may be. It won't be Gardner Minshew for damn sure. He's out with an ACL, but a guy like maybe Jacoby Brissett or something, and we got a young quarterback behind that. But we have to, if you're the Jets, you have to, I understand they're quarterback thirsty in New York, especially with the Giants getting Jackson Dart across town. So Jets fans are extra thirsty right now. But if the quarterback isn't there at number 2, you don't force it. You got 2 first-round picks. You got a defensive-minded head coach. You need a wide receiver, but there's going to be elite defensive players crawling through that first round. And if you have the ability to get a Caleb Downs and a Ruben Bain Jr., let's say Ruben Bain falls because his arms are too short and they think he's too short. And we've heard that. If you're the New York Jets, I would rather walk away with Caleb Downs and Ruben Bain Jr. over reaching on a quarterback at number 2 just for the hell of it.
Well, that goes back to like what we was talking about earlier with the Raiders. Like, at least, even though the Raiders have not been winning football games, but at least they've been stockpiling some high end talent, like the tight end from Georgia, Gentry, we already discussed it, from Boise State.
Mayer's a good player.
Yeah. So, and then we can't forget about Max Crosby, because that's their face of the franchise right now, currently, as of today, and we don't know what his future. What if they plan on keeping him, or do they want to move him? And now with all this extra cap space, that's going to play into it as well, because now some of those people that you may have not been able to keep, now you can, and vice versa. Some of those people that you were like, well, we gonna try to save some money here. Now we can go ahead and cut ties. So that part of it, we don't know even who's gonna become available. because there's always a surprise name out there at some point. And that's what I always look for the next, like after the Senior Bowl, I start looking at free agency hard because that because that's the next step as soon as right after the Super Bowl because the the legal tampering period and all that other the windows and there's always communication going on along amongst people in the game. So, but I know that I wish that the cap, but just during the season, trying to just take the like okay, well if I get a higher pick, chances of me, but then you just that competitive balance, and you just like I ain't gonna tank. I don't care what it takes. I just much rather take it be 50 years before, because that's the only thing. Because I enjoy basketball just as much as I do football. I just got out. I just stopped watching as much basketball because everybody started doing that in the NBA. Everybody was like, "Well, let's stockpile these picks," and but what are you really trying to chase? Because to me, the 76ers, the Philadelphia and the 76ers, how many times did they have the number one pick? And
True.
that you know
And but I think that's where losing on purpose catches up with you because none of those
exactly.
guys worked out. I mean, Embiid worked out, but ultimately it didn't because his health can't stay in order. Ben Simmons fell off. Markel Fultz had one of the weirdest fall offs ever. So all that losing on purpose didn't get them anywhere. Just being honest about them.
And I think as long as you got a good quarterback, a good quarterback that can, like you can be competitive if you got a lockdown corner, a lead edge, a defensive tackle, and you give me a quarterback because wide receivers, there's more of those guys out there. Running backs
Yeah.
that's a little bit harder, but nowadays, it's running back by committee for the most part, except for those, even on Tyler, the backup for he shares carries with the Falcons.
Oh, Tyler
Algier,
Algier. Tyler
yeah,
Algier.
he's
Yeah.
a name to keep an eye on because because I know everybody loves love. I do too. I mean, I'm a big Jeremiah Love fan, but I just can't see the Cowboys because we only have 2 first-round picks. After that, we don't have another pick to the fourth. So,
Real quick before we get out here, a couple more questions. You brought it up. I want to get your thoughts on this because I've been talking to a few people, mainly Fidel Barraza, my co-host from This Week in Pro Football. We've been talking about his Raiders, and the possibility of them moving on from Max Crosby this offseason prior to the NFL draft. To me, the only team that ever made sense was the Rams. The Rams are in best position. They got 2 first-round picks. The Rams are in win now mode. Not saying that they necessarily need more pass rush help, but if you were to package, because the rate, not the Raiders, the Rams have 2 first-round picks. I think it was it 13. They're picking after you guys, if I'm not mistaken, at 13 and 20, the late 20s. If you're the Raiders, you're already picking number one overall. You're going to draft your quarterback, the guy that you feel is going to be the guy that's going to lead your franchise for the next 13, 14, 15 years. You're not winning anytime soon with Max Crosby. You haven't won with Max Crosby at all. Would it make more sense if the Rams came calling and they said, "Listen, take our 2 first. We don't give a damn about these 2 first. Our team is loaded right now. We're in win now mode. We'll give you these 2 first, and we'll give you a first in, let's say, 2028." Or they may, if the Rams want them bad enough, they'll give up their first in 2027 also. Wouldn't it make more sense, even if there will probably be pick swaps in there or something like that, or maybe a third or a fourth that the Rams get back in return from the Raiders because the Raiders do have 10 picks. Wouldn't it make more sense to say, you know what, if I'm the Raiders, I'm gonna do this situation completely the right way this time? I'm gonna take my quarterback number one overall. I'm gonna turn around at pick number 12 and take the number one offensive tackle. I mean, number 13. I'm gonna get the number one offensive tackle that's on the board. I'm gonna turn right back around to pick 28 I'm gonna take the best edge rusher or maybe the best guard on the board. It just seems to me like holding on to Max Crosby symbolizes you're more focused on him being the centerpiece of the rebuild instead of your quarterback. Mendoza is supposed to be the face of this, not Max Crosby. Would it be nice for Max Crosby to get a ring with the Raiders or whatever it may be? Sure. They seem to be pretty far away from that. Now, teams can turn things around immediately, but what are your thoughts on the Raiders potentially turning this right here, this offseason into the offseason that completely transforms their organization to something that they desperately need to be and can be?
Well, that's like prior. If let's just use the Cowboys for example, or Michael. Okay, if you tell me from a Raider perspective, you can give me either two ones, a one this year, and either if you got two this year, you won't give up both of them. That's fine. If you want one this year, or like at least a one in a second. It's got to be like high, because he's right there with Micah. It's arguable, just when you look at it. I mean, I put them like neck and neck. I mean, if Micah got it, they should be able to, because I think the contract, Micah, of course, he ended up getting more money, but that's an agent thing. But as far as compensation, yeah, because you got to look at it. The Steelers handcuffed themselves to TJ Watt by re-signing him.
And I said that was their biggest mistake. Paying a defensive player that type of money when you don't even have a quarterback is ridiculous.
The only reason why with Myles Garrett, because I look at it with Myles Garrett, the moment that they want to trade him, as long as he don't have no trade clause, right now he guaranteed the max value because you can't get no better than what he's been doing. And I
Right.
mean, just he's the number one guy. So you're gonna pay, you gotta pay the premium. And the premium for doing business in that market, that's why you have to develop. That's why you have to draft. You know, that's why I just look at more options, and that's where once we get into free agency, because you'll see one team. We mentioned on Christian Wilkins. He signed that big money deal, leaving. I mean, he was with somebody, then went to the Raiders. They gave him all that money, and then that went awry. For
Yep.
a multitude of reasons. But they had that on the books. Yeah, Max Crosby is an all pro. I have no problem with his game. It's nothing personal. I'm pretty sure they were trying to explain this to him. It's hard for because even DeMarcus Lawrence with the Cowboys last year, it's a hard pill to swallow to understand that finally, you got to move because at that point, I mean, as from a fan perspective, all I can do is like, okay, well, I'm glad he's in the Super Bowl this year with, because he cut all everything he did for the Cowboys. But outside of that, you got to be willing to move on eventually. And when
And
you bring
that's
in,
my entire point.
and
Yep.
that's really, I guess, yeah. And so to answer your question, that's the philosophy. That's the way, or that's my philosophy. That's the way I always view it. And a majority of the people that are majority of the scouts that I talk to on a daily basis, they always tell me that's the same. At a certain point, you just because it's the next stage.
Right. And most fans don't understand. We get so emotionally attached to these players. Like the Lions couldn't get better until they moved Stafford. That's just the way it was. Like it wasn't working here. Stafford going to the Rams helped them out, of course. Those first round picks we got from the Rams helped us kickstart our rebuild the first 2 years. And we've gotten tremendously better, and we do have a Super Bowl window in the NFC. I just think that, same thing with the Raiders. We get so attached to these players and we want to see them win and we don't want to get rid of good players. But I think for Raider fans who feel like, listen, we just got to keep Crosby, as bad as you've been for as long as you've been, and you have the number one overall pick, you've been dying for that number one overall pick forever. ever since the Jamarcus Russell strikeout came and gone. If you believe in Fernando Mendoza the way everybody seems to believe in him, at least from Raider fans and a lot of people in the NFL, why would you not want to make sure you do things 1000% right this time? Like, if you're gonna take this kid number one overall, do right by him. That's my whole thing. At least do right by the kid. Don't ruin him. And you have the
That's
ability to really
not
put
to
a
cut
lot around him.
not to cut you off, but like
Yeah.
that was my exact question for Cam Ward last year. Why did the Tennessee Titans take him? They set him up, and this is just from objective looking in from the outside in. I just looked like they didn't, other than Casey, because the only reason I knew about him was because I wanted Dallas to try, because I knew we needed a defensive tackle, and I was thinking like, well, we'll give them a one for sure, and why wouldn't you want to trade, a veteran? Not that he's not a good football player, but it was time because that it's going to jumpstart the rebuild because Ward, you got to put talent around it. It's not to say that they don't have some pieces, but they right back in the rebuild mode again this year. Except
Yeah.
now you're in year 2 with the
Yeah.
quarterback.
Yeah. I mean, look at Simmons, the defensive tackle. Phenomenal player. They could get 2 firsts for Simmons right now, probably from the
Mm-hmm.
right team.
And that's a known commodity vice. Maybe, a guy, and we not even, 100%, so that's where you just gotta pause and kind of take a step back and look at like we're really trying to accomplish here. Now, if we just build, if we're in the building mode, I have no problem being patient. The only thing that I have issues with from a Cowboys perspective is when they come out and tell us, "Oh, we're going to be all in," and then you, as football fans, you're aware of when people are, just trying to kick the can to the next year, and that becomes obvious. And then usually the last people to know are the ones who've been lying to themselves the whole time. And then they were the ones when the camera shoots up there at them, and that ain't no Cowboy fan. That's you know the organizational brass that they have. So, and that's
Gotcha.
just, I'll leave it at that. So,
All right, man. One more player I want to get your thoughts on. Another guy that's been mocked to Dallas at number 12. Because you guys do need cornerback help, just like my team needs cornerback help, and that's Jamar McCoy, cornerback from Tennessee. You talking about a guy who's 6'1", 190, long arms, fits the physical profile, very fast, very fluid, can play in man press, off man zone. There's not much Jamar McCoy can't do. He's a ball hawk. You look at the amount of pick sixes and interceptions he got a year ago. Problem is this, and it's a double-edged sword when it comes to him, number 3 right there, because he missed his entire 2025 season. I don't put as much weight in that as I think as a lot of other people do, mainly because of when he tore it. When he tore his ACL, he tore it last January. By the time by the time the NFL Combine rolls around, you're talking about an extra 4 months on top of a year that he's had to get healthy. I expect him to work out. I hope he works out at the combine as well as his pro day and everything. But this is a guy that, just to show how highly regarded he is, he's still rated as a number 1 corner in this class. And that's over Mansour Delaney from LSU. Now, I view it like this. Whether a 20-year-old, a 21-year-old, or whatever, 19-year-old, whether or not they take a year off to me is still a year off. I don't put a lot of weight on a torn ACL on a 19 or 20-year-old or 21-year-old, and they've had a year and 3 months, a year and 4 months to fully heal. Because at the end of the day, things work a lot different for these guys now. Is it that much different from Jamar Chase had a great season at LSU, and then he set out the next season, right? The COVID season. Panay Sewell had a great first year. second year at Oregon, then he set out his final year. Micah Parsons, you know this very well, set out his final year at Penn State. All three of those guys still look like all-pro players. Chase is the all-pro, Penei Sewell's the all-pro, Micah Parsons is an all-pro. I believe when the talent is staring you in the face and is undeniable, let's take a swing at it. I mean, I get GMs lose their jobs over failed first round picks or whatnot. First round picks fail. Every organization in the league has a ton of failures at first round picks. But if you believe in the player and you believe in the talent, and you know he's had a year and 4 months to get healthy, and you know he's going to be 100% by training camp if you draft him, go for it. I don't think he's going to be there at 17 for Detroit, honestly. I don't think he'll get past Dallas. I think Dallas, and this is just me looking at it from the outside, looking in, I think Dallas would like to see Caleb Downs fall to 12. But if Jamont McCoy a corner, or even, I don't know if they're high on Mansour Delaney, I think Dallas is looking towards secondary at pick 12, whether it be Caleb Downs. I think that would be the number one choice for them. Or it could be Jamont McCoy. How do you view taking a corner, or any player for that matter, coming off a season where they didn't play at all and they went ahead and decided to go ahead and head to the draft anyway? Because, I mean, you guys in your Dallas, if we're Detroit, we swing and miss at 17, somebody might get fired because we only got one first round pick. And when you failed at the last two corners, remember, Terrion Arnold hasn't played great. Ennis Rakestraw, who we took in the second round, hasn't been good. So if we swing and miss on another corner, a GM might get fired. You guys got 2 first round picks. So if you swing and miss on him, but you hit on the other guy, your GM is still in pretty good shape. So what are your thoughts on Jamont McCoy and the possibility of him being there at 12 or even 20?
Well, majority of the Dallas people that I talk to, and that there's a multitude of people. They all McCoy is very very high on their radar. Like, I mean, that's the one name that, me personally, just because, nothing against the individual player this past year, but we're coming off of a year removed Sharon Rebel Jr. from East Carolina University. He was a rookie this year. He was coming off a torn ACL, and that's where, when was the surgery done? Things, and basically rehashing what you just mentioned. For Dallas, it makes me extremely nervous. Of course, when it comes to the GM, it's not so much about the GM, because we all know Jerry Jones isn't going anywhere other, and you know, it's yeah. As far as that's concerned, I'm gonna be honest with you. It's gonna come down to the medical grade, and me personally, just 1 year removed, because you got to think Deron Bland, who is the other cornerback Dallas has, the nickel guy, or I mean the slot corner, and he also plays outside. He's having off-season ankle surgery. So now you're going to have 3 players, all 3 coming off, and that's just a lot of injuries there. For me personally, I would go Delaney. But I know a lot of people think I'm an LSU homer, and I'm privy to a lot of LSU information. However, when it comes to that player, I, I mean, I do like McCoy. If they were completely healthy, I mean, I would have no problem going 12 with him at all. But they're gonna have to really, like, if I was the general manager, I wouldn't pick him at 12 without being reassured that that knee is, because you can't Dallas cannot afford him not being on field that first game, week 1, against whoever it is. Whatever player they go to pick at 12 has to be a starter. And then when you talk about background, Christian Parker, who's the new defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, he has a background. He's going to be looking for his next Quinyon Mitchell. you know,
Cooper DeJean.
Cooper DeJean, you know, he's got that same makeup. And as you can tell, you compete within your divisions, and you can tell you start competing within your divisions. And of course, Philadelphia, you know, whether you're a fan or not, they've won the Super Bowl in the last 368 days or so, you know, or at least in that window. So we all we can say is people going to emulate the champions. And as you can see, the Joneses have already hired a defensive coordinator with that background. They're going young. They went up young this last year on offense, from a coaching standpoint, and now following that up this year, their defensive staff is like 34, average age 34 right now that they're looking at. So that's you're going young across the board. So that's good, but you're gonna have to you need talent. And of course the leadership of Dak Prescott and having that gives them the advantage because you know, you don't have to worry about as long as you keep him upright, he plays, you're gonna be competitive. You know, and you can go back and look at his career. So, but to answer your question, I would go Delaney over McCoy right now for that simple reason, and to just to put another name out there that you know there's so like that's why a lot of times I prefer to trade back down because Dallas, like I keep saying, those 2 first round picks. That's why those picks trade down options. If people want to buy, they gonna have the opportunity because Dallas gonna be open for business. I'm pretty sure.
He fell out. All right, so before we get out of here, unless he joins us back in, so from a Lions perspective, a Detroit Lions fan perspective, everybody that's watching that's a Lions fan that's followed this show has heard me scream at nausea. Cornerback, cornerback, cornerback. Darius Slay is the best cornerback we've drafted in my lifetime. Well, at least since I've been remembering football. I was born in 1983, but since 1989, he is the best cornerback that my team has drafted. Now, people say, what about Dre Bly? We didn't draft Dre Bly. Dre Bly was pretty much a guy who the Rams had to pay everybody, coming off that Super Bowl appearance. And out of all the names they had to pay, a young Dre Bly wasn't part of them. Detroit ponied up the money, brought Dre Bly in. Dre Bly was a great player for us. Dre Bly, matter of fact, was a great player every stop he was at. Denver. He was in San Francisco for a second. Where else? Of course, the Rams. Everywhere Dre Bly went, Dre Bly was a hell of a player. But for me, mentally, I've been chasing the cornerback for so long, man. For so long. I was not a big fan of Terrion Arnold coming out of Alabama. I thought Ennis Rakestraw was a good player, but I always had questions on his physicality being the issue. He's very physical. The problem is he's only 173 pounds, and he hasn't shown us since he's been in the NFL an ability to stay healthy. DJ Reed was brought in free agency. DJ Reed was decent before he got hurt, the hamstring. After he came back from the hamstring, not so much. I was not high on DJ Reed to begin with. Is he going to be a number one for us? Probably not. Is he going to be a consistent number two ever? Probably not. Is Terrion Arnold ever going to live up to being a first round pick? Because whether fans want to admit it or not, when you're a cornerback that's drafted in the first round, regardless of what player you are drafted in the first round, but especially a corner, you are expected to be a high level elite player. You're not when you're a cornerback and you're drafted in the first round, you're not expected to be just a guy that's part of the secondary, just a nickel or whatever. They're drafting you in the first round because you're expected to be a high level elite player at a premier position. Wide receiver is a premier position in the NFL, and it requires premier players to contest them, to guard them. Same thing with the line of scrimmage. Edge rusher and offensive tackle are the two premium positions on both sides of the line of scrimmage. One stops the guy, one gets to the guy. And when it comes to the cornerback position, you can't get away with what they continue to get away with. You look at a situation where Kirby Joseph's career, not saying he'll never play football again, but Kirby Joseph, there's some questions to Kirby Joseph's career moving forward. How consistently he'll be able to go out there and play football for us every Sunday. Brian Branch, there's a good chance we won't see Brian Branch till probably week 11 or week 12 of next season for that matter. So we got safety concerns. We still have boundary corner concerns. There's a good chance, well, not a good chance, but there is a chance that Amik Robertson may leave in free agency. So this is a team that I understand offensive line can be labeled as a need. Edge rusher can be labeled as a need. Defensive end can be labeled as a need. But cornerback is one of those positions that eventually this team, this organization has to get it right. I don't really view Jahmai McCoy as that big of a risk because, like I said, he didn't play at all last season. He damn near redshirted. He played 1 year at Oregon State. No, he played 2 years at Oregon State, transferred over to Tennessee, had an outstanding first year in the SEC against SEC competition at Tennessee, got hurt in January, and now he's 100% ready to go. I feel comfortable saying that after 1 year and 4 months, by the time the NFL Combine rolls around, Jahmai McCoy should be ready to perform. What he ultimately runs in a 40, I don't know. What he broad jumps, what he vertical leaps, what his short shuttle looks like, I have no idea. But the fact that this guy hasn't played an entire college football season, he went into this college football season rated as a number 1 corner, didn't play one single down, and headed into February, he's still rated as the number 1 corner. So for Lions fans, that should tell you a lot. Jameson Williams was a risk, but also if you look at what Jameson Williams got hurt, the severity of his injury, he still missed some decent amount of time as far as his rookie year. But don't look at Jahmai McCoy as a guy that's a risk, because I get it. He tore his ACL. Adrian Peterson tore his in college. These are younger kids. They heal a lot different. And sometimes you have to look at the talent of the player. Jameson Williams coming out of Alabama, before Jameson Williams tore his ACL, he would have been not the number 1 overall pick, but Jameson Williams would have been the number 1 wide receiver taker. He would have went 7th overall to Atlanta. I'm pretty sure Atlanta would have taken him over Drake London if Jameson Williams would have been healthy at that point in time, because Jameson Williams had that type of production at Alabama in his final year, and Jameson Williams had that type of talent and dynamic playmaking ability. Jahmai McCoy, as far as the cornerback position, I believe is that same type of player. And just somebody I feel, not saying that you have to take him as a Detroit Lions fan if he's out there at 17, just letting y'all know. He's one of my favorite prospects in his class, and if he didn't have the ACL injury lingering over his head, McCoy would have been a top 10 pick. That's the type of talent he is. And if you take a potential number 1 shutdown type of corner and you put him in a secondary with Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph, that makes your defense and your front 7, your pass rush a hell of a lot better. That's just all I'm saying. So, all right, we getting ready to get up out of here. I want to thank John Motley for joining us today, having some in-depth college football talk, because we are walking straight into the Combine season now. The Senior Bowl is 2:37. The Senior Bowl just began, if I'm not mistaken. So, for everybody that's going to watch that, I'm going ahead and let you go. But like I said, I want to thank everybody for joining us this Saturday. Of course, my co-host Ashanti Beasley could not join me today. He's feeling a little bit under the weather, but he will be back with us very, very soon. Till next time, One Pride.